come in. We still got a bunch of people coming in.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Nice turnout today for a really beautiful day. Thanks for being with us. We're not going to keep you long. We just want to highlight a bunch of issues. And Mike and I just did a CAI seminar on some similar topics, more focused on collections. Just be a little more general today. Hi, Jim. Saw Jim in there somewhere. Hey, Jim. Let's see. And Jeff. There's Jeff, everybody. It's nice to see everybody. Brenda, Maddie, nice to see you, Madeline. Rosalind's out there looking good, Rosalind. Let's see. What do we got? We got everybody in there, Eileen?
Yep, everybody's in.
Yeah, so like I said, happy summer, everybody. It's now June. My God, time flies when you're having fun, and we're on the new summer schedule. So we're starting at noon so that all of you property managers can get out and do your Friday afternoon site inspections. I think they're called the Martel site inspections, right, Martel? Special technical language we're using today, Martel. Some of them call them the Jenkinson's inspections as well. So we do have the usual disclaimers, right? This is informational purposes only, and these are not legal advice. There's no client-attorney relationship. If you're going to get an attorney, you have to go out there and sign a fee agreement with some attorney or us. We would love to have you come on down. And we're not going to keep anything confidential. So if you ask us questions today or you put things in the chat, that's fantastic, and we'll do our best to give you an answer, but it's not, like I said, not legal advice, and we're not going to keep it confidential. So if there's something really funky that you don't want the rest of the world knowing, don't tell us today. Give us a call later, tomorrow, what have you, and we'll talk about it. We'll actually have an attorney relationship, and we will keep it confidential. That being said, so we have had some cat people feeling like they have been excluded. So we have started including some cat dog of the day, even though they're not dogs. So we have dog of the day today. We do have a dog of the day. Eileen, if we want to put up dog of the day. There we go. So this is Benny. Benny is awesome. I like the sweater. So this is Benny. Benny belongs to Christina Ortiz over at Association Advisors. And Benny is a Jack Russell mix. Looking good there, Benny. Thanks, Eileen. I would like to, my dog, I'm sure, would love to go play with Benny. And then we actually have the cat of the day today, right? To try and level the playing field, if you will. We have Freddie. Super cute. There you go. We love cats too. We love cats. Those of you who know me know, though, however, I am deathly allergic to cats. And I love playing with them. I just cannot breathe. So the breathing thing takes precedence over me owning cats. Okay, but very nice. Emmy, thanks for sending in Freddie. So let's see. Let's jump right in. Budgets and assessments. So everyone knows that the money. Oh, you know what? I meant to mention one other thing. I'm going to share the screen. So where today's title comes from is the OJs, for those music buffs out there. The OJs, Money, 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 for the Love of Money, if you can see that out there. A great song, great album. I can't play it for you because of copyright stuff and also because the audio doesn't come out right. But if you want to go on YouTube, check out the OJs, Money for the Love of Money song. That's where today's topic comes from. And great stuff from the OJs, if you like that kind of stuff. I know I do. So we're back. And so the money is driven by budgets and your assessments, right? So, and you should, as best you can, have a gradually increasing assessment budget, So if you have a plotted line, it should be a plot that is gradually increasing, right? Because we know, and we talked about this, I think, last month, that in the face of insane inflation, you cannot hold your budget flat, right? It's a recipe for financial suicide because you will go deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole, and you will wind up special assessing hugely, or you will not be able to do projects that you need to get done on a timely basis, right? And then you will also see budget increases that are not a gradual line, but you'll see budget increases that go up tremendously in big jumps. And that is particularly a problem for age-restricted and active adult communities, right? because people buy into an age-restricted community with an expectation that the assessments are going to be relatively close to what they were when they bought in. And if they are on a fixed income, which many people who are 55 and older are, probably not even a majority today, but many, because many people who are 55 and older now are continuing to work in some capacity. But many people are also on fixed income. So you buy in on a fixed income basis, and you're relying on what the assessment was when you bought in, and you know it's going to increase, but it increases hugely. Then you have a real problem. And not only does it make that homeowner unable to pay, it also creates lots of collection work for us, the attorneys for the association, who have to go out there and try to collect money that these people did not anticipate paying.
Hey, so, Fran, can I just give an example of what happens if you do not increase your monthly assessments on an
it's a very good example, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, this past Wednesday, and Weston was there with me, another attorney in the firm. We were at a board meeting until pretty late at night with a bunch of angry homeowners where the community increased their monthly assessments by 35% because over the past 15 years, they did not increase it at all. And then eventually it catches up. And prior to the open board meeting, the association's new insurance broker was there explaining that their insurance premiums were going up an additional $80,000 a year, in addition to the prior $150,000 that it had gone up in the past 3 years. So as costs increase, if you don't gradually increase your assessments, eventually you're going to get to the end of the road and you're going to have to deal with it. So it's ugly. You'd rather avoid that, I can tell you that.
Okay, thanks, Mike. That's a scary example. Let's see. So budget and assessments. Let's go back again and talk about something that isn't always thought of during budget time, right? Because not only you're looking at the budget, which is often primarily focused on operating, but you're thinking about reserves and you're thinking about your balance sheet. And should you write off? Should you think about writing off bad debt at that time, right? Because otherwise it looks like you have assets there, right? It looks like you have a good receivable there. It's a good time when you're thinking about budgets and assessments to think about the bad debt that you do have on the books and whether or not it's worthwhile to send it to us and collect it, which is great, or whether to write it off and not have the expectations that you actually do have assets there, which are really not assets. So it's something to think about and talk with your collection attorney about at that time, because you don't want to carry uncollectible sums on the books. This is especially true if you have homeowners or unit owners that are gone. You know, so they owed a bunch of money to the association, but then their unit was foreclosed or their unit was sold, and for some reason the money wasn't collected. And there are nuances to that. All I'm saying is during your budget renewal time, you should think about what is there in terms of bad debt and whether or not to write off certain sums. We talked about inflation matters. Think about inflation. We don't know, obviously, what this crazy economy is going to do. But I don't see inflation going away. I don't see it stepping back. I don't see it being reversed. Supposedly inflation is slowing and that the Fed is going to continue to take steps to try and slow inflation. I don't see it going backwards in the near term. I just don't see it. And again, I'm not a finance guy. I don't pretend to be a finance guy. I'm not an economist. But I think we have to, for our associations, think conservatively. And that would be that we're going to continue to see increased costs going forward. Operating deferred maintenance and reserves. So for those of you, most of you know this already. I think we have a lot of accountants on the call, usually, or a bunch of finance people on the call, usually. But operating deferred maintenance. So operating is what we assess to meet the cost of running the associations on a day-to-day basis, right? And that's generally should be something relatively easy to get a handle on if the association has been around for some period of time. As Mike said, or reference to, some of the most volatile line items or GL items in the association's budgets are insurance, right? It's very hard at times to get your arms around insurance, and also snow removal, right? Snow removal is a hard thing to get your arms around because you can have a fantastic year with no snow, and then you can have a year with crazy snow, and it can be quite expensive. Nevertheless, operating should be fairly easy to get a handle on. Deferred maintenance is expenses for maintenance that is generally not on a daily basis or what have you, but perhaps over a year or two, happens every year or two. We see that in wood trim painting. We see that in privacy fence staining, things like that. Deck staining, issues like that. Then we get into the reserve funds, right? We get the reserve funds, which are reserve replacement, which are usually items which have significant useful lives, but you're basically accruing funds to replace them at the end of their useful lives. One of the things that associations wrestle with in terms of reserve funding is, we see this a lot with sidewalks. So even though it's great to have reserve funding for things like sidewalks, there are associations that will have reserve line items in their budgets that provide for replacing all of the sidewalks throughout the association at some point. And that is rare, if ever. I don't know that I've ever actually seen an association replace all of their sidewalks. Nevertheless, some associations have a line item in their reserve fund for replacing all the sidewalks. So it's something you should take a peek at with your association engineer, especially when you're getting a reserve funding update from your engineer. Financial reporting. So this is where we talked about things like, there's a couple things. Number one, the association's board at a minimum should get a monthly financial packet from management, right? Which it should include all the association's financial statements. And as you know, I'm a huge fan of putting the association's financial statement on the association's webpage, right? It may be that you want to put that behind a member screen or a login page. Some associations don't like to put it out there to the general public, but they'll put it in with a member password page. It just makes management's life easier, and it makes, I think, the board's life easier because you have transparency and you don't have to have these never-ending debates over what should I get? Why are you hiding it from me? It's not available, when the manager can just direct the unit owner to the webpage. In line with that, financial reporting is the association should be thinking about, if they haven't already, passing a document retention, production, and destruction policy so that you can rationally address member requests for things like financial reporting, copies of the books and records, etc. You can associate a reasonable cost with respect to that. So if members put demands on the association for production of certain materials, the association can charge a reasonable cost, or I shouldn't say charge, pass through the cost. So if management resources have to be paid extra to gather and pull this information, those costs can be passed along to the requesting people. The other thing is when a request for information comes in, and we see these all the time where a homeowner says, I want all of the association's books and records from 1987 to 2023, right? We see that all the time because we know all the board members are fraudsters and they have been since 1987, right? Which is total nonsense and total insanity, right? Because if that was in hard paper, hard copy, that would probably be several self-storage units worth of banker boxes, right? To produce that kind of documentation. So what I like to do when those types of requests come in is, and most people can be talked off the ledge. What we're going to do is this, we're going to start in 2022 because that was the last year that was closed out. Okay. Then if you have a question there, we'll go back to 2021. And then if we have a question there, we're going to go back to 2020, but let's have a reasonable basis. With respect to the destruction policy, the association is permitted to destroy documents, okay, as part of a policy. Not in response to a lawsuit, not destroying evidence, not if there's a pending case, not if there's a threat of litigation, et cetera. Then you have a litigation hold, but the association is permitted to destroy documents in the ordinary course of business. Most associations, right, for tax purposes, et cetera, will keep association documents 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Some associations keep documents forever. They just have documents forever. They have boxes and boxes and boxes of documents. But that gets cumbersome and also very expensive if you're storing them in a place like Iron Mountain or what have you. Some associations do not have on-site storage facilities. So that's that. Let's financial reporting. So the board members should be looking at their financial documents every month. It doesn't mean that you have to be a finance person or a CPA or what have you, but you should work with the board and have some grasp of what's going on. What does a bank reconciliation mean? What does it mean if there's a problem with it being off? Why is it off? You should be able to ask questions about that. On to the Prudent Investor Act. So people throw around the term the Prudent Investor Act. I personally feel that the Prudent Investor Act in New Jersey is not applicable to associations. It's not applicable to associations. However, it does provide somewhat of a touchstone or a reference, if you will, with respect to associations. So the Prudent Investor Act is a law in New Jersey meant to apply to estates and trusts, more or less. And it really came about because what was happening was trust companies and banks were managing estates and trusts in a fiduciary capacity, and they were billing these trusts for administrative costs and fees that were insane, right? Like great trust charges, right? And but they weren't doing anything, right? Why should you be paying $1 bazillion in trust administration costs or bank administration costs when you have the money in cash, or you have the money in CDs, or you have the money just sitting in the bank itself, right? That makes no sense. So the Prudent Investor Act, which can be, like I said, used as a touchstone for some of the things that we do, says that the associations, at least by analogy, would say that the associations financial people, whether it's the trustees or the financial agent that the association uses to invest its funds, has to invest it reasonably, has to invest it in accordance with the governing documents, and has to charge reasonable fees, right? Now, these are all, wiggle words, but it's nice as a touchstone by analogy, the Prudent Investor Act. Again, I don't feel the association is bound by the Prudent Investor Act, but the association is bound by its governing documents. And it's bound by its governing documents, and both the board members and the investor consultant for the association, the investor vendor for the association, must comply with the governing documents. So on to the next topic, we talk about what about the governing documents, and few people read the governing documents in this regard, right? So they meet with their investment advisor and they say, hey, there's this investment vehicle, or this fund, or this money market, or what have you. Bob or Joanne, go invest it there for us. What they do overlook, though, at times is, here's an example. This type, can everyone see that language? You see that language? Okay. So the amounts assessed and collected for the reserve shall be kept in one or more interest-bearing savings accounts or certificates of deposit in a federally insured institution, and shall not be utilized for any purpose other than that which was contemplated at the time of assessment. So that this is just an example. This came out of one of our clients' governing documents, and it really goes to two items. What you can do with the reserve funds, where they can be invested, right? How they can be invested, what type of financial vehicle they can be invested in, and how they can be spent otherwise, right? So it just talks about here, okay, this is what you can invest in, pretty darn limited. And over here, this is how you can spend them. You got to be careful about what you're doing here. And this is not statutory, this depends on your own governing documents. But as I said, the Prudent Investor Act, by way of analogy, says, barring anything else, the trustees are bound to abide by the governing documents with respect to how money should be handled. So that's just an example of the language. You should look at your own governing documents regarding language. But where did this become a huge problem? This became a huge problem for those of us who were around, which probably most of us were, in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, when the dot-com bubble was going crazy in the financial markets, right? So regularly I would go to association board meetings and they would say, hey, Fran, the NASDAQ is going crazy. We want to take the association's $200,000 and put it into the NASDAQ, and we are going to have $600,000 before you know it, and it's going to be awesome, right? And then 2000, 2001 came and the dot-com bubble burst, and people lost their shirts, right, in the market, in the dot-com bubble burst. So that is why governing document language typically has things like it must be in a CD, it must be in a savings account, and it can't just be put into all types of wacky investment vehicles, no matter how well you think they're doing, because really the goal, you want to make money if you can, but the goal is preservation of the capital, right? Because that money is earmarked for repair, replacement of capital items. It's earmarked for that. This is not play money, right? It's not play money. You know that you have to replace the clubhouse roof. You know that you got to replace the tot lot. You know that you actually have to spend this money on something. It's not just Mr. Howell on Gilligan's Island listening to the stock reports every day, right? So this is not play money. We have to make sure the money's there when we need it. So that's the Prudent Investor Act and the governing document limitations on how the association can invest money. On to the investment advisors. If you're not doing this, please, 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 please do this. Please have your investment advisor come in at a minimum once a year. She or he gets paid for this already. They don't charge separately for this. They don't charge extra for this. But have them come in every year, explain to the association's board, this is where your money is invested, whether it's in some type of account or whether it's in tiered CDs that are coming up, because as all of us know, with inflation, right, is awful. Inflation's awful. But the flip side of inflation is that we are all seeing interest rates on the money that we have going up significantly, right? So I don't know about you, but I get marketing stuff from financial institutions that say, you know, our online savings account has gone from 3.5% to 4.5%. We have some people that are quoting 5% right now on online savings account. So you have to make sure that especially many associations have tiered CDs, that as those tiered CDs come up, that they're being reinvested in a responsible way. Again, I'm not a financial advisor. I don't know what a responsible way would mean, because we don't know which way the market's going to go. But you should be talking to your investment advisor as to, should it be put into a CD? Should it be put into a short-term CD? Can we lock into longer-term higher rates? Do you think the rates are going to stay high? Should we be thinking about a different type of investment vehicle? Is there an investment vehicle that could render more money, but is still safe? Do we have to amend our bylaws to provide for us for investing in the way we would like to now in a modern world? Because some association governing documents say the association's fund may only be held in a federally insured savings account, period, end of story, right? So if you want to do other things, you may have to amend your bylaws to do that. But like I said, most people do not pay attention to that provision. So that's investment advisors. The key here is it's a funky time in the market. It's a funky time in the economy. As board members and managers and lawyers, et cetera, you know, we all should be talking to and having a conversation with the association's financial advisors. Now, audits. So I know many of you on the call are accountants, which is great. We love accountants, but a lot of times people who are not accountants and not in business, and I don't pretend, believe me, to be an accountant or an expert in accounting or bookkeeping or anything like that, but a lot of people who are not involved in the field other than being board members don't realize that there are different things than audits, right? There are different things than audits. There are audits, right? There are reviews, there are compilations, there are associations who don't get any type of review by an accountant, which is not such a good thing. But some of that depends on size, some of that depends on how your governing documents are written, and some of that depends on perhaps pending legislation that might get passed. But anyway, so the compilation is I guess you would say the lowest level of review by an accountant. It's very topical. I don't think it really does a whole lot for anybody. A review is perhaps a little more thorough, and then your audit would be kind of the most thorough. I shouldn't say the most thorough, but the more thorough level of testing, of affirmation, of representation of the association's financial position. But, and this it doesn't, you know, many association members don't understand this. An audit opinion, even a clean audit opinion, by a CPA does not mean that you have a warranty that the association has enough money on hand to pay all its bills or has enough money on hand to fund all reserve repair replacements. That's not what that does, right? That's not what an audit does. So there are people, to go back to Mike's example, for example, who come to those meetings and they say, you know, the association has to increase fees by 35%. And they'll say, what are you talking about? We get an audit every year, and the audit said that we are fine financially. And that's not really what an audit says, right? An audit more or less says, hey, we've done some testing. We've relied on the information that we were given by management and the association board members. We've done some testing. We've done some confirmation with third parties like the lawyer to make sure there's nothing crazy out there that we don't know about. And we've said, based on what we found, it looks like the association is reporting and accurately reflects the financial position of the association at a certain point in time. It doesn't say that the association is fully funded. It doesn't say that even though the useful life of the roof in the clubhouse is projected to be 25 years, it's only going to last 10. It doesn't do any of those things. So a lot of people who are not involved in the financial industry believe that an audit is some type of warranty or some type of representation as to a bulletproof nature of the association's financial position, which it just is not. And for the financial people in the room, you know that. The other thing that people believe at times is that an audit is the same as a forensic audit, which it is not. It's far, 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 far different. A forensic audit costs crazy much more money than an annual audit, right? So a forensic accounting or a forensic audit costs way, way, way more money, involves much greater scrutiny of certain issues. And people are too quick at times to say, I need a forensic accounting of this entire organization back to the time it was founded in 1968. No, you can't. No, that would be insane amounts of money. So for those of you on the board and or management, make sure, or as best you can, to communicate with people that they understand that even though you have an audit and the audit is a clean audit opinion, that it's not a warranty. It doesn't mean that the association necessarily has enough cash on hand to fund all of its obligations that may come up in the forthcoming year. It doesn't mean that. So people, like I said, the general public have to be careful of that. Some people disagree with me very much on my next point. The audit retainer agreements with the auditors that I know in the industry invariably contain a provision that either through Zoom or with a person, the auditor will come out one time a year, and Zoom is awesome for them to do this, come out one time a year and either go through the draft audit or go through and present the final audit. So many boards like that done in executive session. I'm a fan of that actually being done during open session, because it really, in my experience, really lends credibility to the board. It opens the auditors up to questions from the floor, right? And can be particularly helpful in explaining things to the membership at large, right? Because the auditors in this industry are very good at what they do, and they're very good to speaking to member questions as to the audit and the association's financial position, and helping the board communicate with the membership, especially when it comes to the financial concepts within the association. Borrowing. As you know, I'm financially conservative. Many association boards are not. But what happens is, unlike the federal government that prints its own money, there are no associations that I know of that have the ability to print money. So your debt limit, for those of you who are out there borrowing money, is finite, right? It's finite. And I think associations have to be very cautious in terms of saddling associations with debt. There are many, many lenders in the field. Mike and I were just out in Dallas at the national conference. Actually, Weston was with us as well at the national conference for a community association institute. And there was a lot of discussion there about borrowing, lending. There were a lot of bank representatives there. It's a nationwide phenomenon right now, and it's not a bad thing. So it's a great thing if the association is caught short and they have to do things like replace the clubhouse roof or repave the roadways. The difficulty is you have to have a solid repayment plan and a responsible repayment plan. Not only because you will not get a loan, obviously, unless you do have a solid repayment plan that's supported by an earmarked assessment. You will have your membership paying fees going forward, thinking again that it is just this is normal, when in fact that you're funding the association with an underlying debt that is probably going to result in an increased assessment after the debt is repaid, because you again have to start reserving for future capital repairs and replacements. So borrowing is a good thing, but it should not be abused. It's not the state of New Jersey. It's not the federal government. Okay, so those of you who use that, you just have to use that wisely and try and take advantage of lower interest rates if you can. That party seems to be pretty much over. Interest rates have been jacked significantly in the past 6 months. I think some loans are at what's 5, 6, 7%, even more. The other thing that you have to watch with association borrowing is transaction fees, right? So transaction fees. So in many loan deals we see, the transaction fees can be significant. So associations will say to us, Fran, we'd like to borrow $100,000 rather than special assess for $100,000. Generally, I'll say to them, that's crazy, because why would you spend the transaction costs on the association's attorneys, me and the association's accountant, and the bank's attorneys and accountants to close a $100,000 deal, right? You're better off. You're better off having a project with a $2 million loan, right? So if you're going to have a $100,000 loan, you might as well just special assess, because it doesn't make sense to have the transaction costs. The other thing to keep in mind is, and this is true of some management agreements, not so true of others. There are management agreements out there that we regularly review, and as you know, we work with many of the management companies. We have some excellent management companies, but we have some management company agreements that have we'll call it a point charge for loan initiation or borrowing. So we'll see management agreements with a 2-point charge for, we'll call it administering the borrowing, right? And they'll put like 2 points in the management agreement. And I can tell you that an association gets involved in a borrowing deal and then comes to find out that the management company is taking 2 points or 2.5 points off the top. The board members will lose their mind, right? Because they'll call it a loan initiation fee or a loan administration fee or what have you. And the first call I get is from the board president, and she or he says, Fran, what did they do for this fee? And I said, I don't know, let's call them and ask them, right? So we get on a 3-way call, and the board president goes, Fran, what did they do for the fee? And the manager goes, well, you know, we gave you 3 names and we talked about some things and we did some stuff. And they go, really? For $200,000? What? You know, so it really becomes a hot item if you're not aware of that in your management agreement going forward. I've had a couple management companies who were doing a fine job in the community, but when it came to borrowing and the association saw the point fees in there, the association ended the relationship because of the point fee. And the management company was not willing to back off the loan fee. So, you know, on the management side, as you know, I am totally in favor of vendors, whether they're management companies or lawyers or accountants or construction people, getting paid reasonable sums for what they do. Fantastic. And what it's agreed to. So that's great. I love vendors getting paid as much as anybody else. But at the same time, boards are very offended if they find what they believe to be a gotcha in the management agreement, and the management company is getting a windfall for initiating a loan or things like that, and they really are not adding value to the process, so, or adding value to the service. I have had a few cases where, as a compromise, the management company said, listen, all right, we'll modify the point provision out of the management agreement, and we will quote you a flat fee for dealing with this portion because it's out of the day-to-day management of the association outside, and that's fine. Matt, you can deal with that. Or we'll charge you an hourly rate because we have to have our back office people do all kinds of crazy stuff and provide all kinds of information for the bank, and that's all fair to me too. Again, I feel that management companies are, I would say, generally underpaid, honestly. But the association can sit down with its management company if they're going into a borrowing situation and talk about what will be the scope of management, how they'll get paid for loan administration and dealing with things like that. I'm talking too long. It's 12:41, 42. So we do have some questions I see up there. I'm going to get to some questions. How do you explain when surplus amounts exist greater than 100K and you still want to increase operating monthly assessments? How do you explain when surplus amounts exist? So thanks for the question, Mike. So I can't explain when surplus amounts exist with 100K, but because my experience, Mike, is that generally speaking, if you have 100K surplus, that's typically an operating surplus, and really you need to take a look at, and you would know this way better than me. Take a look at what the deferred maintenance accounts look like, and also take a look at what the reserve accounts look like. So for those of you who are financial people, you know that there can be IRS consequences for having too much surplus in a not-for-profit corporation. And generally what associations should be doing is passing a resolution to move the surplus in operating over to reserve funds, right? And Mike, you would know that better than I do. But that could be a one-year thing. So you still may have people on the board who want to increase assessments on the trend line because, for example, I don't know if we had snow last year or not. I forget now. I forget what I had for lunch yesterday. But the 100K, right? The 100K may have been from, hey, we just didn't have snow last year, and the association financially wants to keep on the track where they have been going in terms of looking at things like inflation, looking at things like insurance, looking at things like reserve funding or underfunding. That's a good question, though. Mark Sirks. Hey, Mark, I owe you a call. I'm sorry things have been a little bumpy here at the office, but Mark says, must reserve funds only be used for items for which you specifically reserve? So there's a couple of answers to this question. It depends on the language of your governing documents, Mark. So that language that I quoted when I shared the screen, I imagine your governing documents have language very similar to that. And it says, shall not be utilized for any purpose other than that where they were contemplated at the time of assessment. So if your association had language like that, where am I? If your association had language like this, shall not be utilized for any purpose other than that which was contemplated at the time of assessment. That's going to be a yes answer to your question. You're stuck with what you have, right? You're stuck with what you have. You can't be using that money for other things.
Hey, Fran, so I came across in this past week, actually, governing documents that said, if you want to pursue an issue that's outside of something specified in your reserve, you can do it, but you would require a membership vote in order to do it. So it was
Fair enough.
1% threshold for them.
Right. So I'll go on with that's a good point, Mike. So there are documents that are all over the place on this. There are, I would say, the vast majority of documents, Mark, have language that is different than this, in that it does not say that the reserve fund shall only be used for those items. So the association has more freedom. That being said, and I think we have some LAC committee people on the call with us today, there is pending legislation that, correct me if I'm wrong, will basically say that as a matter of law if that legislation gets passed. It basically says that if the association assesses reserve amounts for particular items, they may only be used for those items. So I'll have to see. To continue with Mark's point is, so we have a purchase that one would expect would be eligible to be paid out of reserve, as it is for a long-lived item that will have to be replaced again in 30 years. However, this item was not a line item on the reserve study for whatever reason, or the reserve funds not a pot of funds for eligible purposes, or must they be spent only on specific line items which they were budgeted for? So again, it depends on the language, Mark. Now, shall not be utilized for any purpose other than that which was contemplated at the time of assessment. So this is, you're going to get into lawyer arguments here. So one lawyer would say, that's general language. It just means replacement of capital items, repair and replacement of capital items. So go ahead and spend the money on repair and replacement of the capital items. There are other lawyers who would say, no, 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 it's per GL line item. I should say it's even more detailed, obviously, than a GL line item. It's the roof line item. It's the concrete line item. It's the jogging path line item. I think that the interpretation of it's per item is probably a little over conservative. I think if an association had something that wasn't on the reserve schedule, but you're still dealing with something that is a reserve item, arguably you could use the money to do that. The big caveat to that is you would have to fund it, right? You would have to fund it. And there's a real, you'd have to fund the reserve gap, if you will, with assessments going forward. And I think many auditors would say, I'm going to drop a note in your audit saying that the association used reserve funds to, I'll just make this up, replaster the swimming pool, right? Replaster the swimming pool. And that was not a line item for the reserves. Therefore, the association has not necessarily, but more or less an interfund balance from operating, or at least a reserve shortfall that we all know about, because that line item for replastering the swimming pool, which cost us $100,000, wasn't provided for in the reserve account. So it's going to be a matter of transparency and what the audit wants to do it. An audit that leads to a positive report, an opinion give rise to the audit demonstrates the ability of the association to borrow money as it cannot use reserve funds for operations. So Ed, there's some truth in that, Ed. Historically, associations have borrowed from reserves. I can tell you that. I think that may change depending on legislation that's pending. I know Cheryl's on the call with us. I think Jim's out there too. So I think that may change as a matter of law, but associations historically have regularly borrowed from reserve accounts to fund operating shortfalls. But auditors, CPAs, will definitely note that as an interfund balance. The reserve study is the time to adjust what items not previously covered amend now needed because of aging development. So Ed, you're right. I couldn't agree with you more. So if you find today that the swimming pool is going to need to be replastered in 3 years and it's going to cost you $150,000, I agree with you, Ed. You should adjust your budget to capture that. No question about it. The unfortunate thing is, or fortunate or unfortunate, is we are all riding on a moving train, right? We're all riding on a moving train, and you can't just step off that train. So if we're trying to open our swimming pool in March of this year, March of 2023, and some vendor takes the cover off and says, my God, the plaster is all falling apart and we have to replaster the pool and it wasn't on the reserve schedule, we need to either special assess, borrow from a bank, or borrow from our own money in terms of the reserve account. And I can say with some honesty, with I think complete honesty, that every association that I work with would say, Fran, we're going to do the borrowing from the reserve. We're going to get that pool done. We're going to get that pool open by July 4th. We got to get that pool open by July 4th. And if we can't get that open, if we can't get the money, if we can't use the money from an interfund balance with reserves, the pool will not be open. because a special assessment, for example, may require a membership vote, which is going to take at least a month, if not 60 days. A loan is going to take the same amount of time, and they're just not going to be able to get it done. So the points you raise, Ed, I like, and like I said, I'm very fiscally conservative. The problem is we're a moving train, and sometimes the association is more or less compelled to use its own money to fund things that perhaps were not anticipated. Mike says, can you borrow against your reserve as long as there is a payment plan established, e.g. additional assessment specificity specifically for the loan to ourselves? Is a resolution necessary to support this direction of allowed? So I would say it's a good idea, Mike, to have a written resolution that you're going to do that and that the funds are earmarked to pay an interfund balance with the reserve fund, and I would vote on that. I know your auditors would still drop a footnote in your audit for the interfund balance. I think, like I said, Mike, I think that's going to change in the future as we see pending legislation is probably going to limit the ability to use reserve fund or deferred maintenance funds for anything other than that. The interesting question is, right? The interesting question, because the legislatures are generally, most legislators are not serving on association boards. What does an association do when the snow assessment, for example, comes in $150,000 over what was budgeted, and the association just doesn't have the cash on hand? Are they compelled to go to a bank for a loan? Are they compelled to have a special assessment to fund the snow, even though they have millions of dollars sitting in the reserve accounts because the new legislation says that that money can't be touched? It's a tough question, right? Because what looks good on paper from a legislative standpoint may not always work really well when you have to pay a crazy increase in your insurance premium, or you have a snow vendor that is walking off the site because he or she is owed 100 grand. Let's see. An association may include a line item in the capital reserve study for contingencies. This can be used to repair a long-lived item that is useful, that has a useful life beyond the planning period use. Example, storm drainage. So, Wayne, that's an interesting point, Wayne. I'm not disagreeing hard on this, but I don't like this practice. How do I say this? I would say that there are probably people who say, to a small degree, you can do that. I think it can be hazardous in that to the greater population of the association, people may see that as a slush fund, right? The worst word in the world. That's a slush fund that you feel you can just do whatever you want with, right? And the goal is not to have slush funds. The goal is to have money earmarked for particular items. So I'm not a big proponent of contingencies, even though, there is room, right? There is room to have some margin, if you will, but I'm not an advocate of what will be called contingency line items, etc. What is your opinion where reserve funding is short for yearly expenses? Where reserve funding is short for yearly expenses. So I guess what the question is there is when reserve funding is short for yearly expenses. I guess what the question is the component of your assessment for reserves is too low every year, and you're basically digging a deeper and deeper hole for the association because you're not properly funding reserves on an annual basis. My answer to that would be, honestly, to increase your assessment to meet what you believe is a reasonable approximation of what the reserves will need. Because if you don't do that, again, especially I don't know if you're an age-restricted association or not, the membership will not have a good handle on what these ultimate costs will be. And as Mike Palulek said earlier, you're going to wind up with a 35% assessment someday. Where you see this at its worst, where you see this at its absolute worst right now is Florida, right? So Florida had, unfortunately, the Champlain Towers disaster. Florida then passed legislation that provided for very strict inspection in certain buildings and remediation work in certain buildings. And I can tell you that those buildings did not contemplate this new legislation or replacement of things like cantilevered concrete balconies or rebar reinforced concrete structures. And these associations in Florida, inspectors are coming in there and they're saying, you have to tear off all your concrete balconies that are steel reinforced and have them replaced because we feel there are deficiencies in them. And my landlord, former landlord here, has a place in Florida, and I think he got like a $35,000 special assessment at his vacation home in Florida for his deck, and it was an oceanfront deck, and it was ripped off and replaced. But everyone was presented with a $35,000 bill for removal and replacement of that. So have to be very, very careful of that because if you don't have reserve funding on an annual assessment basis, you're going to get stuck with a big bill. So, and that looks like the last question. It's a
Hey,
beautiful.
Fran, there were a couple questions up at the top. If you scroll
I
up
missed them?
from, yeah, from
Go
Alan.
ahead, Mike.
Yeah,
Sure,
and,
go ahead.
Jim,
Go.
first one, you could take it. So what is your opinion where reserve funding is short for the yearly expenses?
Yeah, they should just be increased. I mean, you should just increase them to recapture in the next budget year. Yeah.
The next question is, how do you respond to owners that think inflation does not affect adult communities?
So ask them if they believe the tooth fairy is going to leave a whole pile of money under their pillow tomorrow night.
Fair enough. And then finally, Jim Maggot asks, can you share a document retention policy with us?
Yeah, we'll send out a sample, Jim, sure. It's document retention, production, destruction. Retention, production, destruction. So yeah, we'll send out a sample. Eileen, could you just write a note to that so I can put something together? But yeah, so thanks everyone. And you should all be doing what apparently the entire world is doing right now. You should be going out there this afternoon. I've never tried this. You should be going out there this afternoon and practicing your pickleball. Practicing your pickleball because apparently the entire universe is playing pickleball right now. So even all these celebrities are buying pickleball professional sports teams. I didn't even know there was professional pickleball, but apparently it's a hot thing right now. So it's a beautiful day. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all in July. Thanks for joining us today.